In this video, we're going to be talking about frame rates, and not whether or not having a high frame rate is a good thing or a bad thing, because of course it's a good thing, but rather we're going to talk about how the narrative around frame rates has changed over time, being that this is a retro gaming focused channel. Now, where this is all coming from for me personally is that I feel like people are just obsessed with 60 frames per second in their games nowadays. Whereas, back in the day, nobody cared about frame rate. Nobody talked about it. I mean, obviously not nobody, but it wasn't nearly talked about as much as it is nowadays. And to illustrate my point, I've got a perfect example right here. GoldenEye for Nintendo 64. This game had a terrible frame rate, but people did not criticize it nearly as much as they would if the game came out nowadays. In fact, the slowdown that it did have, you know what we called it? Slow motion. You'd have, a bunch of big explosions on screen or whatever, and it would start chugging. I mean, really start chugging, where it almost looked like a slideshow. And yeah, nobody cared. I mean, it stood out. It was really obvious, but people enjoyed it. They didn't make a big deal out of it nearly as much as they would nowadays. And look, I'm not saying that the game having a better frame rate wouldn't make it a better game. It probably would. And to a large extent, these YouTube channels nowadays that put up these performance analysis videos, in a way, it's kind of keeping these developers in check and holding them to a higher standard to have good frame rates. So I see the positive in that. And of course, we always want games to be optimized to perform well. The problem is the way people react to it, where they act like they can tell a frame or two difference here and there. And of course, there's people who can tell the difference, but I think your average gamer has kind of been trained to think that frame rate is a more noticeable, bigger deal than it actually is. I mean, a lot of these people making these arguments, they are seeing these performance analysis videos online and seeing the little counter that tells them the frame rate, and I just have to wonder if some of these people would actually know the difference between those couple dropped frames here and there if it wasn't for those videos telling them how they performed. I really think a lot of these people, if they were just playing and watching with their own eyeballs, they would not be able to tell the difference. I should also say that I'm not against frame rate being prioritized over resolution, which is a pretty common preference that a lot of gamers have. And I'm right there with them. I think that is important. Also, there's certain types of games where it is more important for the frame rate to be high, getting up to that 60 frames per second mark. Fighting games, shooting games. Personally, I'm a big fan of platformers, and I really like it when platformers are at 60 frames per second, especially side-scrolling 2D ones, just because the precision is so key, and having that high frame rate really helps. Now, I say that frame rates weren't as important back in the day as they are now, but then again, we were okay with a lot of kind of janky things back in the day, such as composite video, which might as well be the work of the devil nowadays if you ask people. So then I would ask, have we as gamers just developed higher standards for our video games? There's certainly nothing wrong with that. Also, funny enough, a lot of 8 and 16-bit games actually all did run at 60 frames per second, from my understanding. I guess the main point that I'm trying to make is that a game's frame rate should not make or break the game experience for you, unless it's like really atrocious and really sticks out. I think a good way to test this would be to do the following. Play a game without any outside influence, without paying attention to any videos done on it regarding performance analysis or whatever, and just play the game and just see if you enjoy it or not. And if the experience is very positive, then how much does the frame rate really matter? And that can just go for playing games in general. Getting rid of all that outside noise of what people say or think about it, or what they tell you is important, and just what is the experience of the game for you? Is it positive? And that's ultimately what's going to matter. Now, I actually do have a good example of this being the case with a more modern game, and that game would be Bloodborne for the PlayStation 4. It's made by From Software. They're the people who make the Dark Souls games, And Bloodborne is considered by a lot of fans to be the best game they've ever made. And in fact, even a lot of the people working on those games, it's been hinted at through various interviews that they believe it's their best game as well. Anyways, it's a lot of people's favorite game of the entire PS4, Xbox One generation, and it's very highly praised. However, it has something called frame pacing issues. Now, this is a little different from frame rate drops, and what it is that even if it gets to a certain frame rate, certain frames are longer than others, and certain frames are shorter than others. So it can look like the game almost sort of momentarily pausing. And this is something even I can notice. As much as I say like a few frames dropped here and there, I won't notice them. This is something that even I will notice. And yet, people still love the game. People haven't made it out to be so that it's a terrible game as a result. Is it something they would like to see fixed and improved? Absolutely. And this game better get for PlayStation 5. They better fix it to a solid 60 frames per second and do the 4K resolution thing while you're at it, and people would really love that. But anyways, my point is the game's legacy is what it is, even with those frame rate issues. So anyways, those are some of my thoughts about frame rates. I know this video was a little different where I was kind of just thinking out loud and saying what I think as the thoughts come to me, but I would be curious what you all think of frame rates in terms of, do you think people overreact to little discrepancies in frame rates between versions of games? Make too big of a deal of it, or is it justified? Are we just at a point now where frame rate is an important thing that developers should take care of, and we need to hold them to that standard? So let me know. I always love hearing what y'all have to say, and of course I will see ya in the next video.